Okay, so just in chronological order, first hand up, we got Fedor Holz with a king, queen, no diamond, but it actually doesn't matter. Goes for a c-bet. So far so good from both players, but now we're going to see Holz overbetting king, queen here, which is never a play, even with a diamond, because you have many higher equity, lower showdown value straight draws already. I mean, just think about it. Deuce 3, 5-3, 5-6, 5-8, 6-8, 8-9, 9-10, Queen 10. These hands are all bluffed at least at some frequency, but King Queen, King 10 higher are never bluffed. Yeah, and then on the river, the sizing he chooses is almost never used also. Mainly betting like a 75%, 150% or an all-in, even though that's, you know, a 3 times pot or so. These are the standard bet sizes. If you think about it, you have all of these rivered straights that your opponent can never have. So obviously range wants to, you know, use that at least with parts to your advantage. Yeah, King Queen. I had to node lock that he bets the turn, and even when he bets the turn, he never bets the river. There's a dude on Twitter who Victor is actually supposed to play at 1K, 2K live in Vegas called MJ something, and he says, "Oh, Victor, what's with this Ace 3 fold?" But it's a pure fold. Of the top pairs you're going to bluff catch, you want to block a straight basically. And sometimes they're even turning into a bluff, so Ace 5, 6, 9 or 10, calling or raising, Ace 3 and Ace 2 pure folding. Yeah, so Victor plays his hand well, Fedor a bit of a pump bluff, and MJ still a whale. This is probably one of the most controversial hands, I guess, in this match. Basically Victor's going to go for a turn fold, which he knows is an overfold. And so he either does it because he's trying to exploit his opponent, which obviously doesn't work out, and is a good example for why you shouldn't like stray from playing game theory optimal in spots where you know that you can play it, especially if your opponent is close to being a reg or a reg. If he's a fish and he's got some massive obvious leak that you're pretty confident in, sure, maybe try it, but I don't see this being one of those spots. The other argument is that he's just intentionally punting, so he'll get more action. Who knows why he's really doing it, but either way he knows it's not a fold, yet he clicks it. I don't think that's worth analyzing. He just decided to do it for one of those two reasons. If it was an exploit, it was probably not a good one, but maybe it was. Like, maybe Fedor only bluffs Jack 10. You know, you never know. You only see the one hand. But yeah, Fedor barrels like 2/3 pot, and Victor holds it pretty quick, if I recall. Unfortunately, it's often hard to hear like what they were saying because the mic quality was bad and the commentator was talking over the top. But yeah, that's the hand. The Victor 3-bets queens. Fedor continues with the Queen 9 offsuit, which you should do sometimes. And after a little bit of tanking, is going to find a flop raise. We don't know what he rolled, but his hand is good for a raise sometimes, so nice one. This hand I'm including just because it's kind of a weird hand. It makes no sense and it's an interesting pot. But Victor is about to punt. And I'm not really sure why he chooses to do this. It could be to generate more action, sort of similar to this Ace 9 fold we just saw. And it could be because he's run a lot of spots like this, and he's expecting his opponent to have no clue what to do. It's very hard to say why he does what he's about to do, but, you know, submit your guesses if you want. I have no clue. So Fedor finds a nice flop raise, Victor calls, obviously. And then the turn is going to be the Ace of Spades, Gary Greenstein. Victor's range never leads here, yet he goes for a 15% lead. And I'll just pause it here to talk for a sec, because I would have tried to sim this and node lock it if I could, but then I have to come up with a range for this dude betting the turn 15% pot, and I don't have a fucking clue. Like, I have to assume it's some sort of an exploit where, say your opponent just leads into you, you're Fedor here, with whatever hand, just give yourself any hand in your range. You're probably not going to respond very well to the lead. Whereas if a guy has practiced it, and he's like, okay, I could have this range, and if they don't defend in this particular way, they're going to actually lose money to me. Okay, the guy with the leading range might have some sort of advantage. But since I don't know how to build that range, then I'm not going to try and just randomly make a range that leads and node lock it so that we can have some ridiculous sim to work with. So I just leave it alone. All I know is it's not a donk, but he does it. And I imagine Fedor's hand never folds and raises some amount of the time. He goes for the flat. Sorry for the spoiler. And then the river is going to be the magical... See if you can guess what it will be, if you haven't already seen the hand. We had Barry Greenstein on the turn. And then Tony G's Ace from Space coming in on the river here. I wouldn't have spoiled it, it's just there's nothing to talk about while Fedor's tanking, so you know. I don't want to give him too much shit for it, but it did shit up the quality of the viewing experience a bit. And I don't think it would have been so bad if they had a default regular time bank. But their regular time bank is like at least twice as long as like the default cash game time bank. So I think if they just gave them like a standard time bank, it would have been fine. Yeah, in any event, if you were Victor and you did that on the turn, it's kind of tempting to... I don't really... I mean, I don't have a clue. What the fuck do you do once you've done this ridiculous turn play? Anyway, he ends up checking. And it does feel like, you know, we haven't seen a sim or anything, but it does feel like there really is only one choice for this hand. It feels just way too bitch to do anything else. And like in your flop raising range, you have a bunch of quite strong hands. So yeah, definitely don't mind what Fedor does here. I think it's the best play he can make. And I think like the turn to raise the lead is also a bit risky. Like even though his particular hand probably does raise turn sometimes, I think that the flat is way more standard and easy to play. But he plays his hand quite well. Honestly, I have no clue what Victor did there, but he kind of got what he deserved. Now this is a bit of a spicy one. So you're going to see a reasonably heavy punt here from Victor. He's going to check raise 6-7, no diamond. 6-7 with a diamond is just sometimes check raised, but hands that are similar to this that you want to check raise, like low card hands that you're check raising, that you're going to want to be able to turn open enders. So deuce 4 and 4-5 are check raised pretty often. 5-6 is check raised more often because, you know, turn 4 gives us an open ender, which is more backdoor equity. 6-7 with a diamond is check raised sometimes because you can turn gut shots. But yeah, it's a pretty heavy punt. So we've done a bit of node locking in this sim. And on the turn, he goes for a sizing also that's just not used. Because you're check raising a lot of like small one pair hands like deuces at 3, 4s, 5s, etc. Or we're turning a pair with our 5-6, our 4-5. What our range wants to do here is to bet smaller. So we're just betting to put ace high in a tough spot. Sometimes we have trips that are drawing dead. Sometimes we have a pair that's still behind. Sometimes we have a bluff, you know? So we're putting like the ace high hands in a tough spot for a smaller bet. So again, I had to do some node locking on the turn. He does go ahead and overbet it. You really can't blame him once the river rolls off the 8. Funnily enough, in my node locked sim, it actually doesn't want to bluff this hand on the river. But like from a human standpoint, you get to the river, it's a brick. You turn an open ender, which kind of does something weird in your mind where you're like, oh, I kind of have more outs to him folding, you know, or so, I don't know. Like when you when you river an open ender, like that's what I meant to say. It doesn't mean shit, but it kind of means something inside, at least for me. I don't know. Maybe I played too much live and there's all these jokes about making a draw on the river, but anyway, you don't have a spade, you don't have a diamond, so obviously Fedor's going to have just some whiffed flush draws that don't really want to be calling a shove. More often when we have this shit. We also do block the old Jack-7, Jack-6 Sui, whatever, you know. It is what it is. I think the river shove's all good. And the turn, it's understandable, but like the flop is the punt. And this is why you don't want to punt pre-flop or flop. And then if you think a little bit further, it's like, well, if you don't want to punt on the earlier streets, because it matters when you get to the later streets, then what does pre-flop charts mean? It means cheating as fuck cheating, is what it means to me, you know? Anyway. Victor calls the 3-bet, 6-4 suited. Flops top pair and an open ender, backdoor flizzy drizzy. Fedor's gonna check, which is what he pretty much always does with spadeless ace-jack, and almost all ace-jacks checking regardless. Victor stabs, which his hand does every single time. Every combination of 6-4 suited will stab. For the sizing that he chooses, Fedor's going to not fold, which Ace Jack off does 70% of the time, as in call. Obviously more with the spade, less without, but his particular combo about 70%. He doesn't donk the turn, which is very, very good. It's too like there's like a 2.5% donking turn range. It's just way too complicated for human. IMO. Victor bets his hand. 6-4 always bets turn, but a mix of sizes. Like this hand can actually bet larger if it wants, but whatever. It still bets this sizing like half the time. And Fedor's gonna jam it home, which is a great play. So 2 excellent plays in this hand. And just running it once. I'm not sure if this was something forced, because usually within the GG client it says, hey, do you want to run it twice? And they're like, yeah or nah. But there's no such thing in this. It just runs it once, it looks like. So it's more fun, like for the purpose of a challenge, you know, get someone stuck. Bareku. Victor gonna 3-bet the 5-6 of diamonds, and Fedor gonna call with Queen Jack Sui. Victor flops a 6-high flush draw. Fedor flops overs in the back door. Victor should be c-betting this exact combo 2/3 of the time roughly. He does it. Fedor flats it, which he does pure. So, bellissimo by both players so far. Schön. Pjorlian. And now Fedor turns a straight flush draw, straight and flush draw. Victor has a low flush draw, and apparently this particular one wants to never bet the turn. I'll just pause for a sec, it's quite a weird spot. So Victor should barrel half the time with the 5-6 of spades, so I had to node lock the sim to give him half a 5-6 of diamonds too, because it's an understandable barrel. You can't really fault him for wanting to barrel this. The reason I guess you don't want to barrel too many low flush draws is just because you have all these overs in the gut shot which block turned and flop top pairs, which are just better for denying continues. And I guess they're the hands that you want to barrel more frequently. From Fedor's perspective, it's like, well, after Victor bets like this 2/3 pot sizing, you'd imagine that he could ship this hand, the Queen Jack of Spades. But like, funnily enough, apparently with Queen Jack of Spades you want a pure flan, with Queen Jack of Diamonds you want a pure jam. So I guess the reasoning is simply that Queen Jack of Diamonds blocks the turn 10, and Queen Jack of Spades doesn't. So whatever, like you can't, if he shoved this you can't really fault him for doing that either, but he doesn't this time. He makes the correct play, but yeah, it's a tough and close spot for both their hands. And the question of this hand, at least from my perspective when I watched it, was should he be bluffing the river? I was assuming yes. He goes ahead and doesn't do it with the 6-high. I guess he does have missed straight draws with no diamond. He's got like, you know, the 7-8, the Jack-8. He's got the Ace-Jack, Ace-Queen with 1 spade. Ace-5 off as well, like that kind of hand. But anyway, he goes ahead and gives this up, which is correct, and then obviously doesn't continue when his opponent shoves. Fedor defends the 6-2 suited in this rakeless environment, and I think it's rakeless environment. I'm not 100% sure, but it's definitely not the default rake. He's going to go ahead and check raise, which is obviously standard, and Victor's going to not fold, which is also standard. And the turn is going to be... The turn action is going to be a bit whack, but the turn is going to be the 8 of spades. Fedor goes for the Thirdomans, if I recall correctly, and this is nice. This is what this hand wants to do always. But Victor is going to find just a wacky play. And he's going to get punished to the absolute maximum for doing it. So this is quite a cool little hand here from Fedor. And I don't know, like, yeah, I'm sort of buying the hype on Victor maybe intentionally punting, you know, for the action. Because he's certainly doing things that he doesn't normally do, or that he knows aren't good. Maybe he thinks that, like, they might be good against Fedor as well. That's the argument that I'm not sure about. But he for sure is doing stuff that he knows is not, like, standard. Anyway, he's going to go for a turn raise here with spadeless queens. Not that raising queens with a spade is standard either. I'm just highlighting the fact that it doesn't have a spade. Fedor's going to call, which his hand always does. And we're going to see a magical river. Quite a magical river. I want to talk, but like I also want you guys to just see what happens if you haven't already seen the hand. Sitting around saying nothing just feels kind of whack. Anyway, yeah, the river pairs the 8, and I was thinking that he's not going to donk when I was watching this, and he's not going to donk, is he? But he plays it like an absolute master, and when you think about it a bit, which apparently he's done, it makes complete sense. Like, Victor doesn't really raise trips on the turn. Like, his raising range on the turn's kind of weird anyway, but he doesn't really raise trips on the turn, whereas we third a lot of our trips, and we always call the raise. And we can even have like Jack-8 offsuit with 1 spade, like turning a pair and value betting small. And that obviously gets it too. But yeah, basically our river donking range looks like a bunch of deuces making a hizzy and some 10s turning into a bluff. So the sizing he selects is actually good too. So it's quite a sickly well-played hand by Fedor, especially considering Victor goes for an exploit. And the funniest thing about this exploit attempt from Limitless is that Fedor just counters it perfectly. And Victor is actually supposed to call this river bet with the spadeless queens once he's raised the turn, because it unblocks like all of Fedor's bluffs, which are like some high spade hands that peel, and some 10s turning into a bluff. And he unblocks all of that shit with the queens, so it's actually a pure call. That said, who knows if Fedor has enough bluffs, and maybe his range is too value stacked or whatever. An interesting hand for Shizzy. So we've got a single raise pot, Victor defending the Jack-10 off without a spade here. Fedor c-bets the King-Queen suited. And he should only be doing this like 40% of the time or so. And Victor finds a check raise here, which is like a 5% play. It's like more like a 15% play if you have a spade. But yeah, with spadeless, it's like a 5%er. His opponent calls, and surprisingly, Victor can actually value bet this even for like a 75% sizing quite often on the turn. But you can't fold him for the check. It seems like a pretty nice hand to have as a check. So he does it, and he times it well, because his opponent is going to bluff with a hand that he shouldn't have called the flop, and he actually shouldn't even be bluffing on the turn. But you can sort of like see, if you peeled this on the flop, you're not trying to win the pot, it feels a little bit wrong. So you can't fold him for what he's done, and this is a very tough to play spot, I would say, overall, for both of them. But it really, like in most things, in my opinion, they come back to the previous street. If you don't have the punt in there, then he's just not like barreling away with the hand that he's supposed to give up. But yeah, you can't fold him for the bet. He does have a gut shot to the nuts. He does block some strong hands. He does have overcards to most of, well, not actually most of Victor's range, but a decent amount of it. And I would say, like, it's probably a little bit early to call this, but it does seem like Fedor has a bit of a tell. He just like clicks pot when he wants to bluff, but he's not really sure what he should be doing in the spot. And I mean, this is only the second time that we're seeing it, but we might see it again more in the match, or maybe he'll notice it and change it. Who knows? But I would say it's like a little bit of a tell, maybe, maybe not. If I was his opponent and I noticed it, I would probably call him lighter the next time that he did it. Although if I said this publicly and he noticed, I would, then have to change what I do. The leveling wars of heads up are always quite interesting. But yeah, we'll see. Maybe Victor thinks that. Maybe Fedor uses this. The next time he pots the river in round 2, I'm curious. Like, I'm curious what he's going to have. But yeah, he does pot river here. If he had shoved, which his hand actually never does, but like some hands like Queen 3, Jack 3, King Jack and stuff that he bluffs the turn with, which are better bluffs than this, Queen high flush draws, Jack high flush draws, do ram the river. And Victor should actually find some folds against that sizing with this hand. But against pot, it's just snapping. Good bluff catcher and well played. Not the biggest pot or the most interesting one, but a 3-bet from Victor and a call from Fedor pre-flop. Deep stacked here. Victor does c-bet and is supposed to barrel the turn mostly. Doesn't go for it this time and instead checks. But maybe we don't know what he rolled, but he might be doing this too frequently. And Fedor is going to find a value bet with the pair of 6s here, which is supposed to always check back. But I think like the EB is pretty close. It's not that much worse for him to bet. It's like half a blind worse in this pretty large pot than it is for him to check back. So a mistake, but not a big one. But I think if Victor's checking ace queen ace jack too frequently, then the 6-7 bet probably becomes better than a check. So who knows exactly what happened, because we don't know how often they're doing both their actions. But yeah, I mean, his hand's a pure check. Victor doesn't fold for the times that he checks the turn. So everything else is standard. Just a kind of interesting turn bet from Fedor. The river goes check check, and he will win the pot on this brick. There's another strange hand, this one. Fedor 3-bets the queen 6 suited here. Like, I don't know, 135 BBD. And Victor calls the king queen, Fedor goes for the c-bet, Victor goes for the call. And the turn is where it gets a bit strange. Bear with me. Yeah, I might suggest to GG that they change their time banks. I don't know if the players actually requested longer default time banks or not. But I think it shit the action up a bit. And if Victor wants more tables, I don't think he minds if the time bank's a bit shorter on one. Anyway, yeah, Fedor is never supposed to check a flush draw queen 6 here. Since he's betting like quite wide on the flop, he's betting a lot of kings himself. He's pretty well protected. Obviously having all 10s and aces and king 10 and ace king and shit like that anyway. But yeah, he doesn't bet the turn. So I decided to node lock, give him a quarter of this particular flush draw checking the turn. Which he then does not fold to Victor's large stab, which he almost always does with this hand. I'll try not to spoil, you know, it's just they're taking a while to get to the river. So, yeah. But Victor goes for this larger bet size, like a 2/3 bet size, which is good, and it's the only stab size he really wants to use out of a few options I gave. And the only thing I can think about why the hand plays out the way that it does is that Victor thinks Fedor's checking too wide on the turn. Like, Fedor should still bet 45% of his range on the turn. And like, against a perfect opponent, Victor's only punting like 1.5 blinds by making this hero check back. He times it well. Obviously his opponent had the nizzles in this spot. But I think the reason that Victor might have been going for that play in this situation is because he thinks his opponent is checking more than the 45% on the turn. And if his opponent's trapping like all aces, 10s, like, don't know, just a ton of value hands, apparently even checking queen high flush draws on the turn, and then his checkmate might even become better than a value bet. So it's a close spot, and it's one where an exploit might be the difference maker on what's a better play or not. This was a good little hand. I was certainly lost because Victor basically snap calls the flop, and I was like, what, really? I could imagine raising this hand sometimes, but calling just feels a bit wacky. But with the backdoor equity, you never fold this hand, so he obviously knows that, and he makes a pretty quick call. One of the best turns in the deck for him, if not the best. And his opponent is going to value bet. I gave a decent mix of sizes, and this hand he has can use all of them. So he goes for the full pot turn bet, and Victor is going to find a raise. His range really doesn't raise the turn very often. This hand is a nice one for a bluff raise, obviously, and is doing it like a quarter of the time. But like even king 10, it's mainly trapping, just because your range is so weak compared to the pre-flop raises here. But you still have some raises, and this is definitely one of the better bluffs to have. He goes for the raise. His opponent is going to call. Can fold the turn sometimes, but you know, realistically most people don't. And then the river's going to come one of those cards where it's like all of Victor's bluffs kind of get there, or at least most of them do. Like Fedor would beat like a 9-8, which makes his hand like quite bad to call with. Jack 8. He really doesn't beat too much on the river. So even though ace 9, and Victor, by the way, plays his hand perfectly. Like he should be range betting third on the river, basically. No other sizing is even used because he just gets there with too many hands that to keep his value to bluff ratio, giving his opponent a reason to ever call without it just being a chop. He uses a smaller sizing with his range. So yeah, well played. And Fedor decides to go for a fold. Probably realizing that, like, hey, look, a lot of Victor's bluffs just get there. So, fuck. And maybe he's thinking, like, well, one of the only bluffs that I can even think of is the 9-8. So, yeah, he blocking that seems like a decent hand to choose to fold. I'm not even sure if he tanks that long, but he does fold it. And, yeah, it's just a cool hand, because flop peel from Victor, these are one of the things that you don't really know about unless you're a heads-up player. And then just the way that the board plays out and the sizing that he chooses is a cool hand, I think. This is another hand that I found particularly interesting. Because I would have just bluffed. And yeah, it would have been no good. But Fedor's going to see about 70% pot with his hand on this board. All good in the hood. Victor calls. His hand never raises. His hand never folds. The turn gets interesting. Fedor's hand, basically a pure overbet. Victor's hand finding some folds. I guess just the equity. Like Fedor has a lot of high equity hands on a board like this. Like basically, he can have a flush draw. He can have a straight draw. He can have both. He could have him drawing dead with king queen a bunch. So this hand just doesn't want to continue facing that sizing. It's actually a pure fold. Yeah. Unless you've got Jack 7 with a flush draw, you are folding the Jack 7. But he does call. And the river pairs the 10. He doesn't donk. His range can actually donk here a bit, but it doesn't matter too much. And Fedor's going to not bluff like pretty quickly here. And I was thinking this was a punt, but it's actually just another grand play. So it's tough. It's tough to know when to give up the FD and when not to. But I guess the 10 river is it's a powerful card. This hand, Fedor 3-bets the king queen suited. Victor calls the 8-4 suited. Pretty deep. Starting the hand like 235 BB. Fedor goes for the 2/3-ish, 70%-ish c-bet, which is cool, and his hand does a bunch. But then he starts to punt on the turn. His hand, almost, like, of the sizes I gave it, the largest being pot, his hand is potting, I mean, not almost always, but, you know, like a good 3/4 of the time. He decides to go for a check, which, I don't know, I guess he's just thinking deep stacks, like some nutted hands get there that, you know, he's drawing dead against. So he's just thinking of protecting his range with a check here, I guess. But realistically, like, Victor's just in such a tough spot with any of these parent gut shots that he's going to have a shitload of. So you just want to print on those. And Fedor can still have 9-7, bunch of sets, you know. It's not like his range is really suffering here. Victor could actually start turning this into a bluff sometimes, but not very often, just like 20% of the time with this hand. But worth noting, anyway, it does go check, check, and the river is the ultimate brick. And Fedor... I was just watching this hand play out like, oh man, you should be like 2xing the river. You could be just like potting the shit out of this river. And he's going to find a check. Like, it's an interesting thought because he's going for a check raise, obviously. But yeah, it's just a wild punt. It's much better just to bet. And as you can see, there's a list of different sizes. Hopefully you can read the finer details of that image. But yeah, he's mainly overbetting 150% and 200% pot with this hand on the river. So just, I don't know, not a big deal really. I just thought it was kind of interesting because it's a pretty obvious spot where you're either value betting the turn or the river, and he did neither. So kind of a tricky play. Don't know, just worth including, I thought. And then the very next hand, we got Victor defending the 5s against the queen 7 of Fedor, flopping a set. He can donk this hand a bit on the flop here. Basically, the strange thing about his particular hand is there are many ways for him to get to the river that aren't what looks standard. So he could have donked the flop. For the times he doesn't donk the flop, he could have check raised the flop, like almost always, actually, like 80% of the time. For the times he didn't check raise, he donks the turn, like half the time. So he's going to be left with fuck all combos of 5s in theory on the river, as you'll see. And the funniest one, so he could have donked the flop, he should have check raised the flop, he could have donked the turn. I'm not saying these are mistakes, it's just in theory it's quite a crazy way to play the hand, but if you think about how force rates and board pairing affects your donking range, you need to have sets to make houses, and it's complicated. Anyway, the other thing that he complicates it further is he's actually mainly supposed to raise the crumbs of 5s that he had left by that point of the hand. He's mainly supposed to check raise them on the turn, because his opponent doesn't really 3-bet. Anyway, yeah, he does find an awesome run out, coolering his opponent here, and Fedor is going to value bet the river for her half pot. I think that's the size he uses. And for the amount of 5s that are left in Victor's range, he is splitting between the sizing that he chooses and a jam versus Fedor's river sizing. I like the sizing he chose though because it puts his opponent in a really tough spot with a 7. In theory, Fedor should fold something like half of his 7s to this check raise. Keep in mind Fedor can have heaps of full houses here himself because he's using just half pot sizes on the turn. Therefore, like, he's betting basically all of his sets this way. So yeah, it was a cool little hand. Victor's going to find a large raise. Fedor will not be able to fold this time. He may have rolled something, he may have just wanted to call. I feel like he's more of like a flow player. Like, a lot of tournament players are like this. Although Fedor did used to be a cash player too, but it seems like he's more of like a feeling the game type of player. Which, when it comes to heads up, there's a lot of timing and leveling and previous hands and how that may or may not affect the next decision, since people are non-perfect. So yeah, anyway, it does go ahead and pay him off. To wrap things up, we've got single raise pot. Victor's ace queen to Fedor's 10-8 offsuit with a club. He does check raise this type of gut shot 10% of the time, like a diamondless 10-8. Goes for it this time. Victor never does anything except continue. Can raise the flop a little bit, but whatever. Makes the standard call. And the punt of this hand is really just the turn play from Fedor. Once the board's two-toned, like, he's probably thinking he blocks some continues with this 8 of clubs. Like, I mean, it's really only Jack 8 of clubs, but yeah, it's just, you don't have enough equity. You've got some reverse implied odds since your opponent's never folding King 10. If you can find the magical offsuit 9, like, you're getting ripped and you're super deep, so this hand's just a pure give up. I gave him 20% of the combo that he had just to see what it would do on the river. Like, would it choose the sizing that he chose, things like that. When in doubt, click pot, comes up again. Not sure if Victor gives it a bit of a tank here, but obviously goes for the call. Value raising these turns is like a funny thing that you can do, like, in theory, but nobody does. You know, there's like, you're worried about them having 2 pair of set. You're not thinking, let's get some value. But yeah, so the turn is really the only punt of this hand, you know, and the flop frequency might have been off. We can't know that kind of thing, but the turn was a punt. The river, his hand actually pure bets the sizing that he chose. And if you're curious what his range looks like, there's actually quite a lot of jamming here, even though that's like pretty disgusting, since the check raiser never has jacks and queens. But the check raiser can have 4-6, and the person, I mean, like, Victor can have 4-6 of diamonds, but that's it. Whereas the check raiser can have a couple different 4-6s. And yeah, it's just going to town with 3s, queen jack, just ramming. It's an awesome game. Hold'em is a fantastic game. Victor takes a sip of the wine. If you got it, you got it. Immense. It's funny, I think one part of heads up is you don't want to really snap people off unless your hand's super obvious as a snap off. Because you want them to be unsure if you were considering a fold or not. It's sort of relevant to, I mean, at least at the level where your opponent doesn't know you super well. Those kind of things are worth having in there, I think. I don't know if he was really thinking about a fold or if he's just, you know, la-di-daring around so Fedor will continue making bluffs. That might not be good, you know. But yeah, goes for the call, wins the pot. Okay, see you guys on the next one.